Please subscribe and share for more story. At the bank, the branch manager took one look at the $20 bill in Grace Whitmore's hand and stopped smiling. The friendly tone vanished from her voice as she closed the glass door to her office and lowered the blinds. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said quietly, "we need to talk now." That was the moment Grace knew her late husband had not left her $20 by mistake. Something cold slid down her spine, slow and certain. But the story didn't begin at the bank. It began earlier that morning in a cramped law office on Main Street in Lancaster, Ohio, the kind of place that smelled permanently of burnt coffee and old paper, no matter how often the carpet was replaced. The walls were lined with framed certificates and faded wedding photos, smiling couples who had trusted ink and signatures to protect their futures. Grace sat in a vinyl chair that squeaked whenever she shifted. Her knees ached the way they always did when she was anxious. At 58, her body had learned how to speak up during moments like this. She folded her hands tightly and stared at the corner of the desk, avoiding the two people seated across from her. Those two people were her stepchildren. Dylan Price leaned back in his chair like he owned the room, one ankle resting casually on his knee. He checked his gold watch, expensive, polished, and familiar. Grace recognized it immediately. Her husband, Eleanor Whitmore, had bought it for him the previous Christmas. Beside Dylan sat Rachel Price, legs crossed, phone resting lightly in her palm. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, as if she were holding in a joke meant only for herself. The lawyer, Mr. Halvorson, cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Eleanor May Whitmore." Hearing Eleanor's name spoken aloud tightened something deep in Grace's chest. Eleanor, precise, quiet, careful. A woman who counted every dollar and chose her words the same way. She used to say silence was cheaper and safer. Mr. Halvorson began reading. Dylan inherited the rental properties, the duplex near the college, the strip mall outside Columbus. Dylan nodded slowly. Rachel received investment accounts, liquid assets, and a trust for continued stability. Rachel's smile widened. Then the lawyer paused. "And to my wife," he continued, glancing up briefly at Grace, "I leave the sum of $20. Grace blinked. 20? Not 20,000. Not 20%. Just $20. For a moment, she honestly thought she'd misheard. She waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. Dylan let out a short laugh, sharp, controlled, cruel. $20, he said, shaking his head. Wow. Rachel lifted a hand to her mouth, pretending shock, though her eyes sparkled with amusement. Guess she wanted to keep things proportional, she said lightly. Heat rushed up Grace's neck. The room felt smaller, the air thick and heavy. Mr. Halvorson avoided her eyes as he slid a single bill across the desk. An old $20 note, soft with age, folded neatly once. Dylan leaned forward. That what you were worth to her? He asked. At least you can buy lunch on your way out. Grace didn't answer. She picked up the bill. It felt different, worn but deliberate, like it had been handled with care. Grace noticed the crease immediately. It wasn't random. The fold was precise, repeated, intentional. Her thumb brushed the edge, catching on a faint roughness, almost like dried ink pressed into the paper. Rachel smirked. Don't spend it all in one place, Grace. Grace stood slowly, steadying herself. Meeting's over, Dylan said, already rising. Oh, and the house is in my name now. You've got 30 days. 30 days. After 11 years of marriage. After fixing broken furnaces, leaky pipes, cracked steps. Grace nodded once. She understood. She walked out before either of them could say anything else. The hallway smelled of lemon cleaner. Her boots echoed too loudly against the tile. Outside, rain misted the windshield of her aging Ford pickup. She sat behind the wheel, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth, the way Eleanor had taught her. Don't give them a show, Eleanor used to say. Grace unfolded the bill again. $20. An insult. A joke. And yet Eleanor didn't do jokes. She didn't do careless. As Grace drove toward Columbus, rain streaking across the glass, the bill rested on the passenger seat like it carried weight. She didn't know why she was heading to the bank. She only knew Eleanor had once said, very calmly, "If something ever feels wrong, go to the bank first." She pulled into Riverfront Community Bank just after 9. Inside, the place hummed quietly, people depositing checks, an elderly man counting bills, the smell of floor polish and old money. When it was her turn, Grace slid the 20 across the counter. "I'd like to exchange this," she said. The teller smiled, then froze. Her eyes flicked to the bill, then past Grace. Moments later, a woman in a navy blazer approached. Her name tag read Marian Keller, branch manager. Marian studied the bill, then looked up. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked. Grace nodded. Marianne's expression hardened. "Please," she said softly, "come with me." She led Grace into her office and locked the door. That was when Grace understood. Eleanor hadn't left her $20. She had left her a key. Grace sat alone in Marian Keller's office while the branch manager stepped out for just a moment. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound louder than it should have been. The air conditioner hummed steadily, filling the silence. Grace's knee bounced beneath the desk without her noticing. She stared at her hands, half expecting Dylan or Rachel to burst in laughing, shouting that it was all a mistake. They didn't. Instead, her thoughts drifted backward, the way they always did when things grew quiet. She met Eleanor 11 years earlier, not at some fancy fundraiser or charity dinner like people assumed. Grace had been working nights as a facility supervisor at Fairfield Medical Center, keeping aging systems alive with duct tape and patience. Eleanor owned the medical office building next door. One winter night, a pipe burst in her basement storage room, flooding the place. Grace was the only one still on site. Eleanor stood there in boots and a long coat, watching silently as Grace worked. No hovering, no complaints, just observation. When Grace finished, Eleanor said simply, "You're thorough." Grace shrugged. "I don't like fixing the same problem twice." Eleanor nodded, as if that answer mattered more than money ever could. Eleanor was wealthy, yes, but careful in a way most people never noticed. She reused envelopes. She labeled folders neatly. She turned off lights when she left a room. Every document had a place, every receipt a reason. When they married, people whispered. Said Grace was lucky. Said she'd won the lottery late in life. Eleanor never corrected them. She just asked Grace to help manage the properties, not for free labor, but for trust. Grace kept logs. Dates. Repairs. Phone calls. Approvals. Eleanor encouraged it. Paper remembers better than people, she used to say. Dylan and Rachel never understood that part of their mother. They loved the money, not the process. Houses were ATM machines to them. Grace remembered a winter afternoon when Dylan was supposed to meet her at the college duplex after tenants complained about the heat. Grace waited an hour, then fixed it herself. When she told Eleanor later, Eleanor sighed. "Dylan thinks money fixes things automatically," she said. Grace asked, "What do you think?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "I think rut starts where no one's looking." A soft knock pulled Grace back to the present. Marian returned, carrying a thin folder. She sat across from Grace, her expression calm but serious. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "I need to explain a few things slowly." Grace nodded. Marian tapped the folded $20 bill resting on the desk. "Your wife rented a safe deposit box here 10 years ago. Paid in cash. Always on time." Grace's throat tightened. She left instructions. We were not to open it unless a very specific condition was met. Marian paused. This bill was that condition. Grace looked down. "She never told me." Marian nodded. "She said that would be the hardest part." She slid the folder forward. Inside were scanned documents Grace recognized immediately, her handwriting. Maintenance logs. Invoices. Notes she'd scribbled in margins years ago. Grace felt dizzy. "Why give this to me now?" she asked. Marian met her eyes. "Because she believed you wouldn't rush. And because once this begins, it can't be undone." Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. Let us know if you need anything. Grace stared at the screen, then turned the phone face down. Mary Ann stood. There's more, she said, but before we continue, I need to ask, are you prepared for what this may mean for your stepchildren? Grace thought of Dylan's laugh. Rachel's smirk. The 30-day notice. Eleanor sorting receipts late at night, trusting Grace with the boring details. I don't want revenge, Grace said quietly. I want the truth. Mary Ann nodded once. That's exactly what she said you'd say. She opened a drawer and removed a small silver key. Not heavy, just enough. Then we should proceed. Grace took the key. As she stood, something shifted inside her. Eleanor hadn't erased her. She'd positioned her. Carefully. Patiently. Whatever Dylan and Rachel thought they'd inherited, it wasn't as clean as they believed. The elevator to the vault level moved painfully slow. Or maybe it was just Grace's nerves. The soft whir of cables echoed in the narrow space. Mary Ann stood beside her, hands folded, professional but present. When the doors opened, cool air washed over them. The vault hallway smelled of metal and disinfectant, cold enough to raise goosebumps on Grace's arms. A steel door loomed ahead. Another employee waited, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses who nodded politely. A witness, Grace guessed. Keys clinked. The door opened with a deep, heavy groan. Inside, Mary Ann unlocked a narrow box and carried it to a small table. She opened it carefully. Your wife was precise, she said. Inside were neatly labeled folders, USB drives, and a sealed envelope with Grace's name written in Eleanor's tidy script. Grace's chest tightened. Mary Ann handed her the envelope. You can read that later, she said. First, you need to understand the structure. Grace listened closely. Eleanor hadn't left a trap. She'd left a lock. And Grace was the key. Mary Ann explained everything plainly, without legal jargon. Eleanor had built a compliance trigger into the estate, not a punishment, but a safeguard. If certain discrepancies appeared, and if the right person noticed them, control of the estate would pause automatically. The right person was you, Mary Ann said. Grace flipped through the folders slowly. Her old maintenance logs were there, scanned and organized. Invoices she had questioned. Notes she barely remembered writing. Payment doesn't match work. Repair not observed. Follow-up. A strange mix of pride and dread settled in her chest. She believed you'd recognize the pattern, Mary Ann added, and that you'd wait. Wait for what? Grace asked. Mary Ann answered simply, for proof. When Grace finally left the bank, the sky had cleared. Sunlight reflected off windshields in the parking lot. She sat in her truck, the small key resting in her palm. It felt warmer now, like it had been there longer than it had. Her phone buzzed. Dylan. Hey, Grace, he said smoothly. Just checking in. Thought we could talk. About what? She asked. About keeping things simple, he replied. No need to drag this out. Grace looked at the bank behind her. I'm busy, she said. That night, Grace stayed at a cheap motel off Route 33. Clean enough. Quiet enough. Traffic hummed through the walls like distant waves. She spread the folders across the bed and worked through them slowly. The pattern revealed itself without drama. Repairs billed but never done. Withdrawals that matched Dylan's vacations. Consulting fees paid to an LLC Rachel controlled. Small amounts. Spread out. The kind of thing no one notices unless they're paying attention. Unless they're the one fixing furnaces and logging dates. Grace slept barely 3 hours. In the morning, she called an old friend, Martin Hale, a CPA she knew from the VFW. She didn't accuse anyone. She just asked him to look. By noon, he called back. Grace, he said carefully, this isn't sloppy. It's deliberate. Her stomach sank. What do I do? She asked. Martin paused. You do it clean. Don't touch the money. Let the paper speak. That afternoon, Rachel showed up at the motel. She knocked once, then walked in like she owned the room. I was worried, Rachel said. Dylan says you've been quiet. Grace gestured to the folders. I've been reading. Rachel's eyes flicked to the documents, then away. We don't need to make this ugly, she said softly. She slid an envelope onto the table. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. 10,000, she added quickly. For your trouble. For moving on. Grace pulled the $20 bill from her wallet and placed it beside the envelope. Rachel's gaze snapped to it for just a second. I think your mother wanted me to read, Grace said calmly. Not sign. Rachel said nothing. She left without another word. By the time the probate hearing was scheduled, rumors had already started. That Grace was confused. That grief had made her difficult. She let them talk. The truth didn't rush. Neither did she. She moved her belongings into a small storage unit outside Lancaster and rented a one-bedroom apartment with thin walls. At night, she sat at the kitchen table, lining up dates, circling matches, drawing arrows in pencil. Martin came by one evening with takeout and spreadsheets. They skimmed maintenance, he said. Smart enough to pass a glance. Not smart enough to beat records. Is it bad? Grace asked. Martin met her eyes. It's provable. That word, provable, sat heavy. It meant consequences. Not just money. Reputation. Maybe worse. Dylan called again. His voice was tight. You're making this hard, he said. I'm reading, Grace replied. Reading what? Receipts. Silence. Then, you don't have standing. Grace thought of Eleanor bent over her folders late at night. We'll see, she said. A few days later, Rachel cornered her after church, clutching a styrofoam cup of weak coffee. Grace, please, she whispered. This doesn't have to go public. Grace looked at the cup. Too much cream. It already is, she said. Rachel leaned closer. What do you want? Grace didn't answer immediately. She thought carefully. I want the truth to be counted, she said. That's all. Rachel stepped back like she'd been struck. A week later, the hearing room filled slowly. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, tired faces. Dylan sat confident, whispering to his lawyer. Rachel stared straight ahead. Grace took her seat in the second row. When her turn came, she stood. Her knees felt steady. I'm not contesting the will, she said. I'm invoking the review. Documents moved from hand to hand. Logs. Invoices. Bank statements. The room grew quiet, not dramatic, just mathematical. Dylan stood up, red-faced. This is ridiculous. The judge raised a hand. Eleanor's former attorney spoke calmly. Mrs. Whitmore anticipated this, she said. She established a compliance clause. If misuse was found, asset control pauses pending investigation. Dylan's face drained of color. Grace sat down. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She felt tired and certain. Outside, Ohio gray hung low in the sky. Grace folded the $20 bill once, the same way Eleanor had. Some things only made sense when you waited long enough. The second hearing drew more attention than the first. Not a crowd exactly, but enough to change the air in the room. A few local property managers took seats near the back. Someone from the county auditor's office arrived early and spoke quietly with the clerk. Two reporters from the weekly paper sat up near the wall, notebooks ready. Dylan noticed them the moment he walked in. He slowed, straightened his jacket, and leaned toward his lawyer with a sharp whisper. Rachel sat beside him this time. No phone. No smile. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Grace took her seat in the second row again. Marian Keller sat behind her, calm and observant. Martin gave Grace a small nod from across the aisle. Eleanor's former attorney arrived last, carrying a single leather binder like it weighed nothing at all. When the judge called the room to order, the hum of conversation faded. Dylan's lawyer stood first, speaking confidently about grief, misunderstandings, and how families fracture under stress. He said Grace's logs were interpretations. He said invoices could be confusing. He said Grace was just maintenance. Grace didn't react. She kept her eyes forward and waited. When Eleanor's attorney rose, she didn't pace or raise her voice. This case isn't about emotion, she said evenly. It's about records. She opened the binder and began. The county auditor explained how reported maintenance expenses didn't align with observed repairs. A bank representative confirmed the withdrawal patterns, dates, amounts, repetition. Martin followed, translating spreadsheets into plain language. Every number landed quietly. Every silence grew heavier. Dylan shifted in his seat. Rachel stared at the table. Then the attorney turned to Grace. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, "how did you keep your logs?" Grace stood. "I wrote things down when they happened," she said.
Date. Time.
What broke? Who called? Who approved? Did you ever change them later? No, why not? Grace shrugged slightly. Didn't see the point. Dylan scoffed loudly. The judge looked at him. Grace continued. "I didn't know where the money went. I just knew what wasn't getting fixed." The attorney nodded. "And when you compared your logs to the invoices?" "They didn't match." Dylan jumped up. "My mother trusted us." The attorney turned calmly toward him. "She trusted systems." That landed harder than shouting ever could. The final document was submitted, a notarized clause Eleanor had written herself. Simple language. Clear conditions. If misuse was confirmed, control of the estate paused and oversight transferred, not to Grace directly, but to an independent compliance process Grace was authorized to initiate. Dylan's lawyer read it twice. Rachel's breath hitched. The judge leaned back, then spoke. "Based on the evidence, the court orders an immediate freeze on asset transfers pending a full audit and tax review." Dylan's mouth opened, then closed. "You can't sit down," the judge said. Eleanor's attorney added one final condition. If deliberate misuse was confirmed, part of the estate would be redirected to a local housing maintenance trust for low-income seniors. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Dylan turned to Grace, eyes wild. "You did this." Grace met his gaze. "No," she said evenly. "Your mother did." Rachel began to cry then, not quietly, but openly. The judge adjourned the session. Chairs scraped. Papers shuffled. Dylan stormed out. Grace stayed seated until the room thinned. Her hands were steady. Her chest felt hollow. Outside, reporters hovered, but Grace didn't stop. She didn't owe them anything. In the parking lot, Marianne touched her arm gently. "She planned this carefully," she said. "And you honored it." Grace nodded. She didn't feel like she'd won. She felt like something heavy had finally been set down. That night, she slept straight through for the first time in weeks. Life didn't change overnight. The audit took months. Letters arrived in plain envelopes. Calls came at inconvenient hours. Dylan hired new lawyers. Rachel stopped calling altogether. Grace kept working small jobs around town. Fixing railings. Replacing screens. Honest work. One afternoon, Mrs. Dunlap from down the street tried to pay extra after Grace fixed her door. "No need," Grace said. "Just needed tightening." Mrs. Dunlap smiled. "Your wife would be proud." Grace didn't trust her voice enough to answer. Weeks later, Marianne called. "It's finished," she said. The audit confirmed everything. Deliberate misuse. Patterned withdrawals. False invoices. Enough to fully trigger Eleanor's clause. The estate shifted exactly the way Eleanor had planned. Restitution. Taxes. The Housing Maintenance Trust. Quiet help for people who needed it. Dylan and Rachel lost control. Grace didn't gain millions. She hadn't wanted them. She moved into a small house on the edge of town. White siding, cracked steps. She fixed it herself the first weekend. On Saturday mornings, she sat on the porch with coffee and listened to lawnmowers start one by one down the street. Sometimes she thought about Eleanor, how carefully she'd arranged everything, how she trusted Grace with the unglamorous details that mattered most. One evening, Grace pulled the $20 bill from her drawer.
It was softer now.
The crease still there. She didn't spend it. She placed it inside an envelope with her old logbook and slid it back into the drawer. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. In a world full of loud promises and big numbers, the truth doesn't need volume. It needs patience. It needs someone willing to pay attention. Eleanor knew that. And now Grace did too. The quiet afterward surprised Grace more than anything else. Not the silence that follows loss, but the kind that settles once a long argument finally ends. Lancaster went back to being Lancaster. Cars filled the courthouse parking lot one moment and emptied the next. By evening, people were back to grocery shopping and mowing lawns. Grace drove home slowly, the engine ticking as it cooled in the driveway. She sat there longer than necessary, hands resting on the steering wheel. The day hadn't given her relief or triumph. It had given her something closer to closure. Inside the house, she turned on a single lamp and sat at the small kitchen table. The folders stayed closed that night. For the first time in months, there was nothing left to prove. Weeks passed, then months. The audit dragged on, thorough and methodical. Grace answered questions when asked and stayed quiet when she wasn't. Dylan's name appeared less and less in conversation around town. Rachel disappeared entirely. Grace kept working. Small repairs. Honest jobs. "You're thorough," people told her. She smiled at that. One afternoon, Martin stopped by with coffee. "You did good," he said. Grace shook her head. "I just paid attention." Martin nodded. Most people don't. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of cicadas outside. Grace realized she wasn't tired in the same way anymore. The kind of tired she felt now came from work, not worry. Sometimes, people asked why she hadn't pushed harder, why she hadn't taken more. Grace never had a long answer. "It wasn't mine," she'd say. Eleanor had never wanted noise. She'd wanted order. The Housing Maintenance Trust began quietly: new furnaces, repaired roofs, fixed steps for seniors who couldn't afford the work. Grace volunteered when asked. She never told them why. One man clasped her hands after she fixed his railing. "You saved me from falling," he said. Grace smiled gently, just tightened what was loose. That night, she thought of Eleanor's words again. "Rot starts where no one's looking." Grace had looked. That had been enough. Grace kept the house modest. No renovations beyond what was needed. She liked knowing where every dollar went. On Sundays, she sat on the porch and watched the neighborhood wake up slowly. Children rode bikes. Dogs barked. Life continued in small, ordinary ways. Once, Marianne stopped by unexpectedly. "I wanted to see how you were doing," she said. Grace poured her coffee. "I'm okay," she replied. Marianne smiled. She chose well. Grace felt that settle into her bones. Eleanor hadn't chosen her because she was loud or impressive. She'd chosen her because she noticed details. Because she waited. One afternoon, Grace ran into Rachel at the grocery store. It was brief. Awkward. Rachel looked thinner. Older somehow. "I hope you're well," Rachel said stiffly. Grace nodded. "I hope you are too." That was all. No apologies. No accusations. Just two women moving in different directions. Grace didn't feel angry. She felt finished. Later that evening, she took out the envelope from the drawer, the $20 bill, the logbook, the quiet proof of trust. She ran her fingers over the crease once more, then slid everything back into place. Grace learned something during those months. Justice didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived in binders and spreadsheets, in patient hands and careful notes. Sometimes it arrived as permission to sleep through the night again. When people asked how she'd managed, she shrugged. "I didn't rush," she said. "I waited." That answer confused some people. Others understood immediately. Those were the ones she trusted. On the anniversary of Eleanor's passing, Grace visited the cemetery alone. She stood quietly, hands folded, the wind moving gently through the trees. "You planned well," she said softly. No bitterness. No regret. Just gratitude. She didn't stay long. Eleanor wouldn't have liked lingering. Grace drove home with the windows down, letting the air move through the car. That night, Grace wrote one final note in her old logbook. Not a repair. Not a date. Just a sentence. Truth holds when people don't. She closed the book and felt a sense of completion she hadn't known she was missing. Life would continue, uneven and imperfect, but it would be honest. If this story stays with you, it isn't because of money or courtrooms or inheritance. It's because sometimes the quiet person in the room is paying the closest attention. Sometimes the smallest thing, a folded bill, A handwritten note isn't small at all. Grace Whitmore was never erased. She was trusted. And in the end, that trust changed everything. Thanks for watching. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved into me.